let's go ahead and tackle a few more new releases, a couple of streaming ones, and a theatrical one. Many of these of which I'm late on, of course, but we'll get caught back up. So let's actually start with No Exit, I think, because that's the one that's kind of seems to be relatively popular right now. I don't know if it's popular viewer-wise, or if it's just that Hulu seems to really, really be pimping it out. I feel like leading up to its release, and even still now, I feel like I'm seeing advertisements for it everywhere, or at least banner ads. So I just went into it pretty much blind, and it's one of those cases where it feels like an original movie is in here, and like it's coming from this place where it's an adaptation of a novel, but it kind of has the feel of like somebody's first script or something, and I don't necessarily mean that in an insulting way, though it might sound like that, but it does have touches here and there of stuff that feels a little familiar, but stuff that's like welcomingly familiar, stuff like Identity, where we have a storm that is stranding people, these strangers, all in one place. And it's kind of in one location, and there might be one of these people might be dangerous. And of course, because the storm, while not a flood like it was in Identity, is a blizzard, you might also get Hateful Eight vibes, where a blizzard has trapped a group of strangers in one location, and one of them might be dangerous, at least. Um, what's interesting about this, as far as its approach, is that this could be, a budgetary reason, or it could be a creative decision, which is what I would like to think it is. The cast isn't like, a bunch of big names like those other two movies are, where, like, the biggest names here are Dennis Haysbert and Dale Dickey. And somebody that you might recognize now would be Dana Ramirez, who was on Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I think he's going to be in the new Top Gun as well, so we'll be seeing a lot more of him. But our lead actress, Havana Rose Liu, is somebody that doesn't ring a bell. I think she's fairly new. And when we start off with her, it does seem like we're getting like it's one of those interesting things to go into blind, because it starts off and you feel like it's going to be essentially about this girl's drug addiction, where she's in rehab, and she gets a text that her mom is dying from a brain bleed, and so she's going to have to escape from this place to get there, despite her sister saying, no, we don't want you here. And this is, of course, setting up the character herself. And it's sometimes it can be conflicting, stuff like this, because it's always great to have character development, especially when it's going to kind of end up paying off later, given how the character interacts with what all happens to her later in the story. But it can also be that case where you're just watching something play out, and you see all these clues that feel just so blatant to the fact that these things are going to come back, or these things might be useful later. And I was trying to get away from that and just accept it for like this whole, like it doing characterization relatively well, especially given the kind of story that ends up going into, and what exactly the kind of situations this character ends up in, where this stuff does pay off. So it's because it could seem like a really surface level thing, but like as far as this is like you can see almost somebody going through a screenwriting 101 book and saying, I need to do this for character development, and because these are the rules of screenwriting, this has to pay off in this particular way, and stuff like that. That's what I was starting to feel like it might be like, but as it went on, it did feel a bit more organic how these things came into the story. There is one moment towards the end where our main character finds herself in kind of a gruesome situation, or a gruesome position, where it's like physically symbolic in a way that feels a little on the nose. But apart from that, I don't really have problems with how it managed to come together and the way the characterization worked itself into the story without feeling too forced necessarily, because this is a movie that's not exactly subtle about itself. And it's not exactly unpredictable. It's one of those movies that's hard to talk about because the twists start coming really early, maybe even too early, depending on how you prefer stories like this to play out. But the way it starts, where it's that case of you feel like obviously one of these characters is going to be shady, that she's stuck with in this one location, but they start playing with it in really clever ways. Like when one of them introduces the card game bullshit into it, which is another thing that feels, maybe on the nose symbolic, but it actually felt really clever in setting up the whole idea of, finding out like the different tells of these different characters and which ones could be lying and which ones aren't. And the only problem with that is the way it reveals its hand like half an hour in, if that. Like it sets in a mystery when something is revealed that lets our main character know that one of these people is a really bad person, and to say the least. But and then trying to decipher which one it is, and you think that's going to be the whole movie. And I suppose what could be considered one of the strengths is that it's unexpected that they reveal their hand as early as they do. But of course, once they reveal their hand in the first half hour, you know that every 15 minutes or so there's going to be another twist that comes into it, and you start to get a sense. You can start seeing ahead pretty quickly once you get past the whole. Oh, that kind of caught me off guard, but then like it catches you off guard once, and then once your guard is up, then it becomes pretty predictable, unfortunately. But what is interesting is the way we see all the characters, good or bad, and how they unravel, and how we're never quite sure, like. It becomes clear, like, who's going to be good and who's going to be bad and all that. But the other thing is what all these characters have up their sleeve once that's established, that will still keep you intrigued regardless. And it is one of those cases where you have, once we get to like past the hour mark, and it seems like it's found a stride, and it's like everything's on the table now. You're still anticipating like for one more shoe to drop. So when it does, it's not going to be as impactful as it could be, because it feels like it's laid out so early that you're to expect that something's going to happen. So yeah, and it's like I said, it's really hard to dance around what all is happening here since everything's revealed so early, and I wouldn't want to give too much away or anything really. But yeah, so as a character thing, it's fine. As a mystery, it's fine until it reveals itself too early, and then just as an overall thriller, it's fine. I guess like it's basically the perfect thing to just kind of be put on streaming, I guess. I think it was made for theaters, and it would have been really interesting to see this like get a theatrical one. I'm assuming it wouldn't have been like a massive one or anything, or one that lasted long by any means, unfortunately. But there's enough here that it's fine. Like if it's that, like the whole thing where they put all the ads out, so it's like, of course, it'll probably be on the front page of Hulu, so it's like, okay, I'll see what that is. And then it'll happen to you, and then you'll move on to the next thing, and that'll be pretty much it. And it won't leave any particularly lasting impression or anything like that. Probably not something you'll go back to or anything. And that's another thing, too, that's kind of revealing, is usually with movies like this with a lot of twists, like, the first thing you'll want to do is go back and see what happened. But it makes itself so obvious in many ways so early that it doesn't even feel like it's necessary to go back and see, the inner workings of what it was and what clues there might have been beforehand. Because it's just kind of average overall. So it's fine. But like I said, I think we'll mostly completely forget about it once it comes and goes. So that's unfortunate. But there are some strengths in it, particularly within the actors. But that's about as much as you're gonna get as far as like an effective thriller or anything like that. But it's not gonna have the staying power of others from the era that it seems to want to invoke, but doesn't seem like it quite gets there. So that's my very scattered thoughts on what that is. So let's go from Hulu to Amazon now to I Want You Back, which is something I saw like one promotional poster like every now and then of, and it was what seemed to be this very generic romantic comedy with Charlie Day and Jenny Slate, and it's like, well, coming from the humor of Charlie Day and Jenny Slate, and the fact that it's, an R-rated movie, made it seem like, is this going to be a traditional romantic comedy, though? Even though it looks like it, and the premise certainly sounds like it. Like, it was almost kind of, like, I was almost convinced enough that the premise was cliche enough that I was surprised when it actually did come out to some acclaim. And it's from Jason Orley, who did Big Time Adolescence, which I really, really like. So, going into this, we're also coming fresh off of Marry Me. And there's kind of an interesting reversal thing going on here, because I actually praise Marry Me because I found Marry Me very surprising in how it approached its seemingly very cliche concept, and it was kind of like going into this. But the thing is where Marry Me, I felt like subverted a lot of stuff and was unexpected in a lot of ways. Like to the point that Marry Me's still getting a lot of hate, but I think that's mainly on its premise and advertising, and it's not from people that have actually seen it. This, on the other hand, I went into kind of assuming, well, it's got to be turned on its head in some way, because you've got, people here who are willing to kind of go more for an edge to regarding stuff like this. And the way the way the characters approach this morally, you would think there would be more of an edge to this than there actually is, but this does just kind of play out in a pretty cliche, obvious way, and many of the situations are really cliche and obvious. Like, how many times have we seen the movie where a character is sneaking around and then has to hide, and then while they're hiding, two people come in and fuck? And like that's in this, and it's like, how many times have we seen that already? And you'll be saying that a lot throughout this, like, oh, I feel like I've seen this a lot before. There is certain charm here from Charlie Day and Jenny Slate, and like seeing them together and stuff like that. It's just a matter of how much that can carry it, because there's a lot of characters in this and a lot of familiar faces. A lot of familiar faces that are, very funny and reliable, especially in the past, like Manny Jacinto, who was Jason in The Good Place, is here, and Gina Rodriguez. Scott Eastwood, who I haven't been the biggest fan of at all. Like, he's just generic incarnate. But between this and Wrath of Man, he's starting to finally show that he has, like, a personality, I guess. It's coming out. And here, like, he plays a seemingly likable enough character, but when you look at his character, who's the one that broke up with Jenny Slate, and Gina Rodriguez, who's the one that broke up with Charlie Day, they're... But given this premise, you would kind of want there to be more to them than there actually is. But they're really just kind of those characters, just the ones that broke up and the ones that the characters are trying to get back to. But they have enough charm in here and enough, relatively funny moments here, but nothing lasting enough to feel like that there's... the whole thing would have felt a bit more well-rounded, and the stuff that happens to the main characters would have felt a bit more earned, I think. If we got to know these characters a little better, rather than just being in the places of... They're basically the objective, and that's pretty much all they are. So there's that. But, yeah, going back to the premise, though, and where these characters stand morally, this whole idea of them... it's almost like a Strangers on a Train thing, except in a romantic comedy, where each one gets into the life of the other person's ex, and they're trying to work their way back so that they can convince these people to go back to them. Like, they can get each other's person to go back to them. And the ways in which they do this, and like the manipulation and the deceit that's involved, you would think, especially in such an acclaimed movie, that more attention will be drawn to that. Because there's a lot of, like, manipulation and really shady shit that happens in regular romantic comedies. It's just because that genre can be so fucked up that nobody draws attention to it. And that's where a lot of criticism in that genre lies. There's a lot of weird shit happens in romantic comedies that we're supposed to accept as romantic and happy and all that. And it's in the comedic situations. So you would think this would, like, be drawing attention to that, or not even necessarily having the character say, like, oh, this is fucked up or anything, but you can also draw attention to it by, like, amplifying it. And it's like, especially when you have Charlie Day here, because obviously there's one particular thing that he's very well known for, and that's the thing is, not only was Charlie Day's presence here a constant reminder of, this could be a lot darker than it is, and a lot more edgy than it is, but there's, like, multiple reminders of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia throughout this. Like, there's this theater that I would love to know the location of if it's real, that just plays random movies, it seems, where he and Jenny Slate go to a movie theater that's playing Con Air and the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's like, where the hell is this theater? Because I want to be there. And one of the scenes they're watching in Con Air is one of the scenes with Cole Meany, and it's like because he just played Charlie's dad on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and then there's this whole thing where people are constantly telling Charlie throughout this movie to pop his shirt off, which of course is like a running joke with the Always Sunny in Philadelphia guys. So it's just like those constant reminders of that also are just like this movie should be a lot more like pushing it than it actually is, especially with what's going on here. But it's like, no, it really just plays itself out as any other romantic comedy, complete with the situations and then where we end up. So that feels like it was really lacking. Like that was something where you were kind of like anticipating like the movie taking the next step or going in some taking some curveball into another place. But that never really comes. It just kind of is what it is for nearly 2 hours, which is pretty long for a movie like this, especially when the situations are not exactly inspired, and a lot of which we've seen before. And then there's like subplots that are just completely meaningless, like when Jenny Slate is undercover with Manny Jacinto, who's putting on he's this like pretentious art director who's putting on a Little Shop of Horrors play for like middle school, which is basically just the joke of his character, despite how funny he can obviously be in many aspects. But she ends up meeting this troubled kid and befriending him, and there's a lot of scenes devoted to this that don't really have much of a payoff, and I'm not really sure what they're doing. I don't know if it's supposed to add another layer to her character or what, but it just seems really out of place every time it's here, especially with how much time is devoted to it. So I'm not even sure what that was. But there are some comedic bits in here that do work. Because obviously just the way, Charlie Day or Jenny Slate can just say a line can be really funny. Or the way they approach a situation or something. And but there's also times where it's like the dialogue just kind of dies. Like there's a Cruel Intentions reference. And there's just like this awkward exchange and then the scene just ends. And there's a few scenes like that where there's just like there's an exchange going on and the dialogue's nice, and then it just has this awkward ending to it, and then the scene just cuts. Maybe that's to show, maybe that's a take on something like, real life banter isn't just, that, easy as far as like being scripted and stuff like that, and it'll have like those awkward moments and stuff like that, but it honestly just felt like the writing just took a day off, or it was improv that just couldn't find a good ending and just couldn't stick the landing. I don't know. But it doesn't really work either way. But then you have bits like I just talked about that Jason Orr, the director, had done Big Time Adolescence. And Pete Davidson has a cameo in this where he's very fun. I know a lot of people like to hate on him, but I think he's hilarious. So I was happy with the Pete Davidson cameo here and that whole scene. And then the direction that scene goes, there's another cameo in this scene, actually. And that's... So the way that whole segment played out was quite funny, especially with the way Charlie responded to it. So his name is Peter in this, but I'm just so, like, it's... well, I also just got off of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia binge, so it's hard for him to break away from the Charlie thing, not just because it's his real name, but Kelly as well. But it's... Yeah, so you see how that's... There really should have been something here that went to that level. That these people have gone before, and I don't know if it's like, it seems like it's afraid to break out and just go that extra mile, but it's like, you would think with the R rating they would be open to just saying, like, let's just like, if we can just acknowledge that these characters are morally bankrupt with what they're trying to do, and then just run with that, and like take it as far as we can go. Obviously that's one of Charlie Day's specialties, but it's... I don't know, it just kind of feels like it keeps falling short of what it could be doing. But it's like, it's charming enough to where you're always with it. Like, I never really tuned out of it or anything. But it's, like, mentally tuned out of it. But, yeah, it feels like there was more potential here than what we get. So, but some of it works and some of it... It's very much like No Exit. It's just pretty middle ground. That's pretty much where we are this whole time. Because now we can go into Dog, which is the directorial debut of both Channing Tatum and Reed Caroline, who are obviously they've been teaming up for a while now with like Magic Mike, but even before that, where Rita Carolyn was like a producer on Stop Loss, I think, and they've had this part. They're basically like Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, where like one's the face and one's more behind the scenes, but they're like this inseparable duo that have been working forever. Um, and going into this, it kind of looks like one thing, where it's, Channing Tatum befriends a dog, and they don't get along at first, but then, they start to care about each other, and that's the movie. Like, that's pretty much it. And it's a movie we've seen many, many times before. Everything from, kids' movies from the 90s and the 2000s to As Good as It Gets. Like, it just anywhere in that middle ground. But there's something else going on here that I don't know, because I was under the impression it was just essentially a dog movie, especially given the title. But there is more to that. We're also dealing with Tatum's character, who was in the service and now he's down. He's trying to get back in, and the only way he can really get back in is by doing this job of taking this dog from where he is now to the funeral of her previous owner, who he served with. And it also becomes this thing about, like, PTSD, and he's clearly got like an alcohol problem, and he's just in this really deep and dark place as a person, and it's like kind of coming out of that on top of the whole dog thing and confronting basically everything about his life, and it gets pretty real in many instances, before the dog and during the dog. And so we do have, moments in here that seem like they'd be right out of like an early 2000s comedy or something, where like he pretends to be blind so that he can get a free hotel, and then that, goes haywire. It seems like it's going to be lighter. Like, it's one of those cases where he walks in and he sees the dog for the first time and he says, "What's up, dog?" And it's like that that kind of sets you up for something that might be a little lighter than what we actually get here. And it's like, even with the darker aspects, this might sound weird, but there was a nostalgic feeling to it. Like, I felt like this movie was something that I would have seen with my grandma when I was a kid in the theater. And I know that that doesn't sound like the highest compliment, but it kind of is. Because it did kind of bring me back to this sort of nostalgic place to what movies I not necessarily loved as a kid, but movies I certainly saw in theaters as a kid, and that takes me to a certain place that I really appreciate. Um, but as it goes on, it does seem like it has a very obvious setup. He's gonna befriend the dog. The dog's gonna tear shit up and all that. But he learns to love her, and she learns to love him, etc. But there are a lot of unpredictable run-ins here also. Like, unpredictability is not the kind of thing you would expect from a movie like this, but it's definitely in there. Like, when Channing Tatum obviously reunites with Kevin Nash after the Magic Mike movies, and Nash's part is, like, that whole segment just went in like three unpredictable directions, like, all at once, which was wild. And Jane Addams is introduced in those scenes also, who's, like, this indie queen that was in, Happiness and a lot of... She's made her own movies as well. And just him going from, like, person to person and running to running. Like, he runs into a cop that's played by Bill Burr, and you think that's going to go in one direction, then it looks like another direction, then it's another direction. Like, how he interacts with these characters and how the characters respond to him. And then Ethan Suplee is in here as another dog owner. And there's something about this movie that feels very... It's interesting how it combines what you absolutely expect from this kind of movie to those kind of unpredictable directions and those unpredictable run-ins, and you're not sure how these characters are which direction they're gonna go in when they meet Channing Tatum's character. And it's still, despite, these moments that are quite serious and the stuff that it explores, particularly, like, the PTSD stuff, there's still, like, genuinely funny moments, like when he's trying to sweet-talk the dog into the bath, and stuff like that. And it's like, it does actually, it is kind of tonally all over the place, a lot of the time, but those individual moments do hit pretty well, even if they don't mesh together necessarily. And you can, get the sense that it's their directorial debut, so it's like they're still they're kind of experimenting a little bit with how to do stuff, because there's some stuff here that's like has a little bit of visual flair to it when that might not be necessary, when simplicity could just be the way to go. Um, but you can still appreciate that the obvious passion that was in the story. To my understanding, the dog's name in the movie is Lulu, and I think that was Channing Tatum's actual dog's name, and it was the whole thing was based on like he'd gone into kind of a depression about the whole Gambit thing, and I guess he like took a trip with his dog when his dog was kind of at the end of her life also, and then that's what ended up spawning the idea for this, where it was Reed Carroll that said, "Hey, we should definitely make this a movie if we're gonna make a movie," and it ends up becoming like this really unexpectedly personal thing, and you can see in Tatum's performance that there's something real here, because we've seen multiple Channing Tatums before, where we've seen, funny Channing Tatum with like the Jump Street movies, and we've seen him like his likability and his charm and stuff like the Magic Mike movies. And then when you look at Foxcatcher, where we can see like where he can really find a darkness in himself and go to these really deep and dark places, and this performance is like all of those things like all together. Like it's everything he's learned about acting up to this point all went into this performance, and it's really impressive how all that was able to come together. On top of him also, co-directing the movie also, and you can see that he's really like, because it was one of those cases for a long time where it's like people just saw Channing Tatum in a certain way, like when the Step Up movies were out. But when you hear him talk about acting and his ambitions and stuff like that, you really get the sense of somebody that's passionate about what they're doing and somebody that wants to get progressively better at what they do. And jumping into directing is a really good start. And like I said, a performance like this that takes everything we've seen him do before and puts it all in one place is a really good start and shows that he can learn along the way as he goes. And yeah, so this does come like this is one of those movies we're talking about it now. I'm appreciating it more than I necessarily did when I was actually seeing it. But yeah, so this has a lot of promise for him as both an actor and him and Carolyn as directors. So yeah, I would seek this out. If like Tatum hasn't completely impressed you yet, maybe this will finally push you in that direction. So yeah, so that's very surprising how this was pulled off. So, and the kind of movie that it is. So if it's another thing also where if you think it's just going to be like a dog movie, you'll get more than you're expecting. Especially since there also seems to be a respect with Tatum in regards to like being in service and then PTSD and stuff like that. Since we just mentioned that these two also worked on Stop Loss, and how that went in all those directions. So yeah, a lot of unexpected things about this movie. So yeah, but yeah, I kind of like it. So there that is. So I guess we can end this here. So the next thing is going to be when I talk about the Batman with my brother, which is very exciting. And then I was trying to decide if I was going to see Studio 666 soon or not. And I'd probably talk about that and The Cursed together, at least. Maybe we can throw another horror one in there if there's always a horror somewhere around, so we'll figure that out. But yeah, so we got all this other stuff coming up, like the award stuff and whatever Owen and Ashley have going on. So yeah, so whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.